I recently did a video where I discussed why I bought the Waldorf Kyra synthesizer, wanting a multi-timbral synthesizer for a doorless performance. And in the comments I had people ask me why I didn't buy an Oscillators Virus, but I've already got that, which I discussed in the video, and I don't want a second desktop virus. I also had a few people say, why did I buy that heap of junk? And that they had chucked theirs in the trash. Well, obviously you had to have bought one to chuck it in the trash, so yeah, I did laugh at that one. Okay, in this video, what I want to do is I want to discuss some of the similarities between the Oscillators Virus and the Kyra and how they do differ. I mean, you could call this a boxing match between the two, but anyone who has had a go on either of these synthesizers will know who will win from the get-go. So it's not really a competition. The Virus is definitely a better synthesizer. This is more just a comparison of where the features overlap and where they vary. Okay. The oscillator section is here. In order to access any of the features, obviously you got your different knobs here, and for every knob you turn, a value will come up here. So it's saying oscillator 1 shape. Here we have a wave select, semitone, and a detune, and we have an FM amount, mono on and off, and sync. Basically, to enter any of the oscillators, because you only got one set of knobs per oscillator. You've got select button here. You click that, and it'll take you from oscillator 1 to 3 and back again. It'll want to edit oscillator 1. You click on edit, and what then happens is all the parameters for the oscillator appear on the screen down here. So once you've done that, you've got two options. You can use these dials up here to change parameters, but you can also use these knobs here. So you've got 3 value knobs here. The first thing to point out on the Virus is you have oscillator mode. You have classic, hypersaw, wavetable, wave PWM, grain simple, grain complex, formant simple, formant complex. So they're all basically just different modes you can enter, and for each mode you then have a selection of shapes. In classic, a spectral wave, and spectral wave, when that's selected over here, the first wave is sine, triangle, and then from that point onwards we have different waves which we haven't got any description for, but it goes up to 64 different wave shapes. So I guess the best thing to do is actually play a sound. So we've got a basic sine wave, triangle, Anyway, so as you can see there's a whole bunch of different waveforms with different personalities, different characters. I tend to find that obviously the sine and the triangle are the classic waveforms which you use. From there onwards you don't know what you're getting, you just have to kind of like just listen and see if you like the sound. And then after that, wave and then saw is a certain percentage, and then it goes into saw, pulse. Okay, so this is kind of similar to what you have on the Kyra. So here you have whatever wave you choose, plus a certain percentage of sawtooth. Right, so let's go back to sine. And the more you turn this dial up, the more sawtooth gets added to the sine wave. How does that vary from the Kyra? Well, on the Kyra, rather than having one dial and then having a percentage of another waveform coming in, you actually just have separate knobs for saw, wave, and pulse. And also you have a sub oscillator dial as well. And you can also choose triangle, I guess is the closest to a sine wave. And you do have on the Kyra, in the wave tables, you do actually have a sine wave. So you can select the sine wave as your wave table oscillator. And then you have another knob, which is actually your saw. And you just add a small percentage of the saw and a small percentage of the pulse. So that's how they vary. They both have the same thing going on there, apart from on the Virus, you have one knob that adds a certain amount of the sawtooth. When you get to 100% on sawtooth, it just turns to sawtooth, pulse width appears, and then from there on, you got sawtooth plus pulse width into this 100% pulse. So that's not too dissimilar to what you've got on the Kyra, apart from, rather than having different knobs for saw and pulse, you've got one knob here which you can add a certain percentage. The next mode is hypersaw. Bear in mind, this is one of the main differences between the Virus and the Kyra. The Virus has got 3 oscillators. Each oscillator is a certain waveform, but you can mix in a percentage of another waveform. On the Kyra, they're classing all 3 knobs, saw, wave, pulse, as separate oscillators. So on here, because you've got hypersaw selected, that's one oscillator. And for that oscillator, you've then got, on the page, you've got different pages for your hypersaw. Density, detune, sync on and off, and then semitone, key fellow, and balance. So if I then go up to my oscillator section here where I select oscillator 2 by pressing the select button, everything on this page is referring to oscillator 2. Up here, I have the balance between oscillator 1 and oscillator 2. I've got hypersaw on oscillator 1, and I'm going to go to oscillator 2, and I'm going to turn that to a sine wave, okay, because that's a very different waveform. Okay, so I can mix in a completely different waveform on oscillator 2 to oscillator 1. I can have hypersaw on oscillator 1 and a sine wave on oscillator 2, and I've got oscillator 3 that has slave, saw, pulse, sine triangle, and then some wavetable waves to choose from. Okay, so how does this vary from the Kyra? Well, on the Kyra, when you go into hypersaw mode, you don't have access to oscillator 1 and oscillator 2 anymore. You only have 2 sets of knobs for changing the intensity and the spread. That's one way where the Virus really does change from the Kyra. The Kyra, once you're in hypersaw mode, that's it. You only have that one mode. You can't have another waveform on oscillator 2 and 3. You only have hypersaw mode, and then you can't really do much with it either, to be honest. The options are quite limited as far as I can tell so far. You definitely can't detune one and the other. As we're on the Virus, you could have hypersaw on oscillator 1. You could also have hypersaw on oscillator 2. Okay, so, and I can detune them and actually three oscillator groups or oscillators. Each one allows you to choose a mode, and obviously I haven't really been through the other modes. We've got wave tables, and grain. I've never really used many of these. I normally go for the classic waveforms. So all I've got to say about that really is, on the oscillators on the Virus, the options are actually pretty much endless. Even though it feels like the Kyra's got a lot of options, it is actually limited in comparison to the Virus. On the Kyra, you have your tune for oscillator 1, you tune for oscillator 2, you have a detune for oscillator 2. For each oscillator you have a saw level, a wave level, and a pulse level. So like we said on the Virus, you chose a wave, and you can see when I twiddle this wave knob on the Kyra, oscillator 1 levels screen comes up and you've got levels for sawtooth, wavetable, pulse, ring mod level. As a default on the Kyra, the sawtooth is up max. We can obviously take that down completely and turn the wavetable up, or turn that completely down. Have your pulse level up. If I change the pulse width, the screen will change. Okay, obviously I can turn them all down completely. So I guess the main difference between the Kyra and the Virus, you had a wave and then you mixed in small amounts of the saw, and then eventually you got to 100% saw, and then it went on to pulse, saw and pulse, and you mixed in small amounts of the wave. Here you have a lot more control how much of each you can have. So that's one difference. You've got two oscillators, so you can do the same with oscillators. You've also got two sub oscillators, and you can choose the waveform for the sub oscillator, which you can't do on the Virus. One of the differences is the wave tables. So if I click on wave and I turn the wave up here on the screen, you press down twice and it gets you to the wave groups. Within the wave group, you have a number of different waves. So in group 1 at the moment, 99 different waves in group 1, which is construction set 1. That's only group 1, and then you got construction set 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 20 construction sets. Then it goes on to guitar, acoustic guitar sounds, alt saxophone, birds, bits reduced, lo-fi, blended waveforms, bright sawtooth, cello, cheesy strings, clarinet, double bass, distorted, electric guitar, organ, piano, flute, FM synth, sawtooth, granular, hand-drawn, human voice, linear waveforms, oboe, it goes on, lo-fi, overture, piano, plucked algorithm, rounded, square, raw waveforms, rounded, square, bit reduced, sawtooth, sine, bit reduced, sine harmonics, sine, snippets, square, symmetrical. Anyway, as you can see, triangle, video game, violin. There's an awful lot of groups, and each group has a varying amount of waves to choose from once you're in it. See, the bird one has 13. The main difference there between the Virus and the Kyra is the Kyra actually gives you an image of a waveform. The image can help you how complex the waveform is going to be in the sound. It also has groups. The Virus doesn't give you categories. We mentioned hypersaw on the Virus. So if I click on this button over here, you're now in hypersaw mode. One thing I mentioned about Virus is you could have hypersaw on oscillator group 1, but you could also have hypersaw on oscillator 2, and you could do different things with those hypersaws. You could even have a hypersaw on 1 and a sine wave triangle, any other wave you wanted on 2, or vice versa. You don't have that on the Kyra, so here's your hypersaw sound. These two knobs, which are related to the hypersaw intensity, hypersaw spread. And then you have a sub oscillator for the hypersaw. Which is not controlled by the oscillator values, and as far as I can tell, there is no way of changing the loudness of the sub or detuning it, or once you can just turn it on and off. For me, this is one way that the Kyra is actually limited, because once you're in hypersaw mode, that's it. You're in hypersaw mode, and all you can do is change the intensity, which I guess adds sawtooth waves to it, and you can add a spread, which spreads it further apart, and you can hear the detuning a lot more when you're but there's no way of manually changing the detune between the hypersaws, and there is no other option other than to have it in hypersaw and to change the intensity and the spread. Obviously on the Virus you can have many different variations in that sense. The hypersaw is quite limited on this compared to the Virus. One thing you could potentially do is you could if you wanted to, you could have your wave selected rather than hypersaw, and you could make sure that a sawtooth on oscillator 1, a saw on oscillator 2, detune them. But you could also bring in the wavetable. Bring up the wavetable. In my wavetable, I could actually go to somewhere on here was grabbed sawtooth. You also have the sub oscillator when you're in wave, which you don't in hypersaw. You could choose what waveform you have, sawtooth for the sub. So what I'm basically trying to say is you can create your own hypersaw using the two oscillators and using the sub oscillators to get potentially 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sawtooths all stacked up against each other and actually have a lot more control over it if you did that. I mean, obviously hypersaw is quite cool because you can just click on it. So the hypersaw does have a unique character, but it is limited. So ways of accessing the oscillator parameters, you twiddle the knob, the related page comes up. For each oscillator group, you've got a select and it brings up oscillator group 1. The first page is controls, and these are tuning, FM, LFO to pitch. The second page is volumes for each of the oscillator options. Second page is pulse, which is the pulse width and modulation of the pulse width. Click on wave. It brings up voice control. We have the patch volume, voice mode, wave or hypersaw, dual mode if you use dual mode, glide, bend, hard sync on and off, key mode, poly or monophonic. So now I want to look at the filters. A lot of people complain about the interface on the Kyra, I guess for menu diving and getting from A to B. There's an awful lot of menu diving on the Virus. It's not much different in that sense. Okay, so moving on to the filters. So on the filters, we have filter 1 and 2. We have the various different things we can choose from. We've got low pass, high pass, band pass, and then we've got a knob here for both cutoff 1, cutoff 2, resonance, envelope amount, and filter balance. Okay, so in order to edit any filter, you press the edit button, and over in your screen comes up all of your filter parameters. On the Virus, you have serial 4, serial 6, parallel 4, split mode. So you can run them in series, you can run them parallel, or you can have this filter split, the Kyra. If you want to use both filters, filters 1 and 2, you only have split mode. There is no parallel or series. If anything, that is the most frustrating thing about the Kyra. I mean, I've only got 2 of the synthesizers. I've got this Virus and I've got the Polybrute. Both those synthesizers allow you to have the filters in series and in parallel. The Polybrute doesn't have a split mode that I'm aware of, unless it's hidden on there somewhere. So, and I didn't even actually know that the Virus had a split mode until I compared the two. If I twiddle the filter cutoff here, you can see that there's a number, which is the amount that the filter is open or closed. And you've got a number here in brackets, which is the value it was set at before you twiddled the knob. And this is another important feature of the Virus, which the Kyra doesn't have. If you've created a patch and you've set your filter at 79, you twiddle your EP resonance at 30, envelope amount to 50. For each parameter you set, you've got an original amount in brackets. So this means when you actually save and store that patch, that value in the brackets will be the value you saved the placement of all the knobs. So that will change from 127 to 77. That will change from 0 to 30. So you don't ever forget what the original patch values were because you've got them in brackets. The Kyra doesn't have that. On the Polybrute, it doesn't have brackets. It has a picture of a circle with the line on it, and there's another line which shows you where to line up that line with, if that makes sense. And the Kyra doesn't have that, so that is a little bit annoying. One thing that the Kyra does have is an undo knob. One thing the Polybrute has, you can save snapshots as you're going along. So if you do something, actually that sounds good, you save a snapshot, and then later on, if you've twiddled all the knobs a bit too far and you've gone completely crazy and lost the original essence of the patch, you can go into your snapshots and you can go through the snapshots until you find the one you can go back in time. A bit like a history in Photoshop or Illustrator or any kind of like graphic software. You have a history and you can go backwards and forwards and the Polybrute has that, which is great. The other thing that the Virus has, which the Kyra doesn't have, this saturation page. All these options in here are all actually the same settings which are in the distortion, so I don't really know how they work in conjunction with the filters, but it has it, and I'm sure there's people out there who know more about the Virus and how this works in conjunction with the filters. So in order to select your filters, again, just press one of the filter buttons. Press filter 1, press filter 2. Underneath the filter 1, you've got 3 options: low pass, band pass, high pass. There are 2 more options available on the Virus. And also on the Virus, you could have both filters active in series, parallel, or split. If I click on this dual mode, it says filter configuration, single or parallel. What parallel means on the Kyra, it actually means split. Filter 1 will be coming out one speaker and filter 2 will be coming out the other speaker. They're not stacked on top of each other, which creates a nice effect in a stereo situation, but I actually quite like to have my filters stacked on top of each other. I don't want to have one coming out of one speaker and one coming out the other speaker, because when you twiddle the cutoff frequency, depending on what filter you have selected, that's what it brings in and out. But you can hear on one speaker the cutoff is coming in and out, but on the other one is coming out of the speaker as normal. So yes, you can have 2 filters, but you can't have them in series or parallel in a way that I understand. Dual filter puts it into split. One speaker has one filter, one speaker has the other filter. And if you turn it off, dual mode, so it's coming out of both speakers, you only have one filter available to you. There may be some overlap, but very limited. Effects area. The Kyra has delay, reverb, EQ, distortion, chorus, phase. That's where the options do come to an end, I'm afraid. On the Virus, you press the select button to scroll through delay, reverb, EQ. And if you want to edit any of those, press edit. All the options for delay, just selected at the moment, come up on the screen. And depending on what delay you select will depend on how many pages there are for the delay. So we have classic delay, a bit like a stereo delay, just coming out both speakers equally. Taped clock, taped free, taped Doppler. 4 options for type, obviously send and feedback, and then mode, simple delay, ping pong, of all the different variations, and then you get to pattern 1+1. 2+1. You got correlation, which sounds like it's basically just choosing between the low and the high for the delay. So you can EQ it basically. Modulation and waveforms. So there's an awful lot of options there for the delay. Same for the reverb. You got reverb mode, and you got feedback 1 and 2. You got small room, large room, hall, and ambient. You got clock and time, so obviously dampening and correlation again, where the reverb sits on the EQ spectrum. So an awful lot of options there. You've actually got different modes of reverb, you've got different types. So the low EQ, the mid EQ and the high EQ on the Virus are pretty much exactly the same as they are on the Kyra, so I'm not going to really go into that. On the bottom line here, you've got distortion, character, chorus, phaser and other. If we press edit now, we're in distortion. And you've got types: wide, light, soft, medium, hard, digital, wave shaper, rectifier, bit reducer, rate reducer, soft bounce, hard bounce, sine fold, triangle fold, sawtooth fold, low pass, high pass, bit reducer, old, mint overdrive, carry overdrive, saffron, onion, pepper, chili, and then for each of them you've got mix, high cuts, each overdrive there are different options. So you have treble boost. This is not really a demonstration of the sound quality, but you can see it's more about options. Moving on to the next section of this effects unit, character. So in character, we have analog boost as the type at the moment, intensity and frequency. But within type, you've got different options. So analog boost. So the analog boost adds a bit more kind of body to sound. I think it kind of like balances out the frequency range. So if it adds a bit more low end and mids. The next one, vintage 1, vintage 2. From what I can tell, vintage 1 and vintage 2 are adding some kind of movement to the sound. So kind of some kind of subtle modulation to kind of mimic old-fashioned synthesizers. Vintage 3, pad opener, lead enhancer, bass enhancer, stereo widener, speaker cabinet. I guess they all, in some ways, they all kind of like EQ it in a certain way or add some kind of modulation. Next one is chorus. So chorus, classic, vintage, hyper, chorus, air chorus, vibrato, and rotary speaker. And for each of those, different options like speed, distance, mix, angle. So we've got rate, depth, feedback, delay, mix, LFO. Phaser, although the phaser is just a mix on and off as far as I can see. One last thing, we have other, and this is vocoder. I've never used this setting, to be honest, so I can't really tell you much about that one. So an awful lot of options on the effects section for the virus, and not only is there an awful lot of options, but for each option you have multiple different types. There may even be more. Because I have a Mac, the software, the virtual instrument or the virus connect, if you like, it no longer works on the Macs. If they did do any firmware updates, I haven't updated mine in a very, very long time, but when I did update it, they added in the distortion section many of these extra options at the end. The curry, saffron, onion, they were all new types of distortion which were added at the time. Both the virus and the Kyra, neither one of them is going to be updated anymore because the people who made the instruments have decided to discontinue them. Incredibly frustrating. And for all those people out there who've bought them, you are now in a situation where no more firmware updates, which is not really an issue. If you're happy with the way the instrument works, that's fine. If you're happy with using it as a piece of hardware and not with your computer, that's absolutely fine. And a lot of old school synthesizers never had any kind of connectivity to your computer, so you just use it like an old school synthesizer with some modern quirks. So we mentioned that the low and the mids and the highs EQs on the virus and the Kyra are pretty much exactly the same. The next option down is distortion and limiter. And now I've selected that section. On the page here is the options for the distortion. We have mix, drive, algorithm, which is basically type, and we have a roll off at the end there to take out any highs. And then we've got the type, but on this is where it varies the most. We've got soft rectifier, hard rectifier, soft bit crush, hard bit crush, ganache. Yeah, limited options on the overdrive and the distortion, and I have to be honest, the only one that really gives you a classic distortion overdrive sound is the ganache. It's not quite the same as the options on the virus. So on the delay, go down to the next setting, delay. Again, you've got the mix, the time, feedback, mode and clock. So most of those parameters are the same, but if we go through the mode, you have two modes: stereo delay, ping pong. There's no options for the ping pong. Once you've selected ping pong, you can't choose whether it's 2, 1, 4, 1. You have no tape delay, just stereo and ping pong. Phaser, same options. Chorus, similar options. In terms of mode, we've got chorus combo, flanger, chorus, doubler. 4 options basically. A few more options than that on the virus. There isn't any options for different types of reverb. There's only one option really. I have to be honest, it's not the most interesting reverb. I know a lot of people put their synthesizers through external effects anyway. That's probably what I'll be doing on this one. It's not that it's dreadful, it's just it's not great. And in comparison to the Virus, which has reverb, feedback 1 and 2, has ambient, small hall, large hall. On top of that you have the options to EQ with the correlation. So yes, it has effects, so that's something. You know, you can do stuff with those effects and add them to the sound, but they are limited in comparison to the Virus. The mod matrix here, we didn't really talk about it on the Virus, but it has 6 parts, and when you go in there, each 6 parts has a source and a destination. I think in terms of the comparison between the Virus and the Kyra, as far as I'm aware, it's not quite as many as the Virus. But neither one of them are as good as the Polybrute, which has the mod matrix and is so easy to use. Oh, it's just amazing in comparison. So even the Virus, which is a great synthesizer, in comparison to the Polybrute for the modulation, in my opinion, isn't as good. So to round up, yes, the Virus is a more powerful synthesizer in my opinion. Does that mean I regret buying the Kyra? Not at all. That's not why I didn't buy the Kyra to compete with the Virus. I bought the Kyra because it met my needs at the time of buying. If I was going to buy another Virus desktop, I would have had to buy it second hand. I bought the Kyra second hand, and in comparison to price, the Kyra was cheaper than the desktop Viruses online. Also, the Virus is like 15 years old. My Virus is 15 years old. The Kyra is, I think about 8 years old, maybe younger, but it's not quite as old. I don't know how long these things last for. I know if you buy a computer, components pack in after a while. So I'm really hoping that my Virus lasts an awful lot longer, because I do love it, and as far as I'm concerned, it's still as good as new. But who knows what's going on inside that synthesizer, whether any of those components or chips or whatever may malfunction on it at some point. If anybody knows or has had any experience with a Virus packing in, or has had to have any work done on a Virus, I would be interested down in the comments and how you go about doing that, because if anything does go wrong with my Virus, I do want to be able to fix it and kickstart it back into action. Also in the comments, let me know your thoughts. Is it really that important that the Kyra doesn't compete with every other synthesizer out there on the market? If I wanted a synthesizer that was the bee's knees and did absolutely everything, then obviously I wouldn't have bought the Kyra. But what I wanted was a multi-timbral synthesizer, and even some of those synthesizers out there which have all of the different brilliant, amazing functionality don't have multi-timbrality, not to 8 parts at least, anyway, maybe 2. So, you know, you make your decisions based on your needs at the time. Anyway, thank you for watching. I've been Tempered Truth, and I'll see you in the next video.